Welcome to Hidden Earth's Sleep Story. Tonight we will read from the book, Stone and Shadow, the Elemental Saga. Prologue, Beneath the Bloom. The air was still in the heart of the Eleran wilds, but the roots were restless. Deep beneath the flowering canopy where Sylve Lightvale tended the sacred bloom groves, something ancient stirred. At first, it was mistaken for a simple tremor, an idle quake that sometimes rolled from the distant ironroot barrens. But Thalen Skydrift knew better. His senses, honed by the currents of the sky, told him this disturbance didn't rise up, it pulled down. As if the land itself was being drawn inward toward a hollow heart, the druids of Eleran, ever in tune with the song of the earth, noticed their root-ward trees recoiling. Sylve knelt beside the eldest of the Mulnatha, a sentient bark pine older than the first accord. Its voice creaked through the pollen-rich air. Stone weeps. Something forgotten is remembering. Alarmed, Sylve called for Thalen, who had been soaring above the Golden Ridge cliffs. He arrived in moments, descending like a gliding spear of wind. Together, they entered the undergrove chamber of tangled roots and earthen spirals, where memories of the wilds were stored in living wood. There, buried beneath vines that hadn't shifted in centuries, they found something that did not belong. It was half buried in soil, but the shape was unmistakable, a jagged shard of obsidian fused with shadowglass, carved with glyphs unlike any the druids knew. The surface pulsed faintly, as if breathing. When Thalen brushed it, the chamber went cold. The wind outside fell silent. Sylve felt her bond with the forest hesitate. Then came the voice not spoken, but felt in marrow and soul, the seal. Weakens. The hollow stirs. Shaken, they brought the relic to the council grove. The bloom wardens debated, but none could identify the material. The glyphs did not match any from flame, tide, storm, or bloom. Sylve, heart heavy, realized what it meant. She sent a wind-carved message to Lyrian and Kael'tor, wherever they were. The world could not afford another war, not so soon after storm and bloom. Thalen remained quiet, his gaze fixed on the shard. "This isn't just a remnant," he said. "It's a beacon." And far to the east, deep beneath the ironroot barrens, something enormous shifted in its sleep, hearing that call for the first time in an age. Chapter 1: Earthspeaker's Warning. The ironroot barrens groaned like a wounded beast. Room Earthspeaker stood with his lifelong companion Sura on a stone outcropping above a canyon known as the Moor of Calgar. His thick calloused hands pressed into the red-veined granite. He didn't speak, not yet. He listened. Beneath his feet, the ancient language of the world trembled, and he felt it in his bones like a low chant carried by stone itself. It was not the usual tectonic shifting of the barrens, whose plates and canyons moved like sleeping giants under the watchful care of the stonebound. No, this was something deeper, more ancient. A resonance not heard since the founding of Stonehold. The core bleeds, the stone murmured in its way, the vibrations subtle, but clear. Behind him, Runak, his stone-willed mentor and one of the elder geomancers, stood silently, awaiting Room's judgment. The other stone-bound warriors remained further back, not out of fear, but respect. When an Earthspeaker entered the trance of listening, all knew better than to interrupt. Moments passed. The vibrations subsided into silence. Room opened his eyes. "It's not a quake," he said at last. His voice was gravel wrapped in authority. "It's a warning." Runak frowned. "From the core?" Room nodded. "The rhythm is fractured. The stone calls to be heard, not commanded. The two descended into the nearest seismic crevice, escorted by golem guardians that stirred from their alcoves in the rock. They approached a natural rift known as the Speaker's Scar, where leystones once used for prophecy pulsed faintly. Room knelt before one of the stones and began to chant the Earthcode short guttural phrases passed down through unbroken lineage. The stone glowed and cracked. Runak gasped. That's not supposed to happen. Etched into the broken surface of the leystone was a new glyph one neither of them recognized. Room touched it and staggered back as a vision struck him, a shadow stretching beneath mountains. A voice with no sound. And a whisper only he could hear, "The hollow returns." He collapsed to his knees. Sweat beaded on his brow despite the cold stone. "Summon the Stone Council," he said. "Now? Now. And send a runner to Stonehold. The Deep Stone Archive must be consulted. There is something beneath us, Runak, something that remembers we forgot it." Room rose slowly, his muscles still trembling from the aftershock not of earth, but of truth. Something was waking. And it had not forgiven being buried. Chapter 2: Saloon's Return. The hollow deep had no sun, no moon, and no sky, only shadow, silence, and the shimmer of memory. Through those lightless halls walked Saloon of the hollow gaze, barefoot and ethereal. Her steps made no sound, but the stone beneath her seemed to remember each one. The void beneath her feet curled like mist, revealing paths long since hidden. She did not ask it to move, it moved because it knew her. She had not been seen since the end of the conflict between Storm and Bloom. Some said she had died. Others, that she had walked too deep into the spirit lattice and never returned. But Saloon was not gone, only changed. Where once her eyes flickered like amethysts in starlight, they now glowed steady violet, like twin moons locked in eclipse. Her voice, once as fluid as ink in water, now carried the weight of stillness. She had gone beyond the veil, beyond the tether of the spirit walkers, into a realm without form. And she had returned carrying its whisper. She passed between the obsidian arches of the Hollowheart Temple, where the elders gathered in their quiet rituals. None spoke as she entered. None needed to. Her presence announced itself like a tremor, silent, but impossible to ignore. At the center of the temple stood the memory pillar, a column of translucent stone that pulsed with the souls of those who had walked between life and death. Saloon approached it without hesitation. She placed her hand upon the stone. Immediately, the room dimmed. The air thickened with memories too old to name. The spirits within the pillar stirred. Some wept. Others whispered in forgotten tongues. One cried out, "Unbinder." Then Saloon spoke. "The world cracks where memory sleeps." A silence followed that was deeper than quiet. It was reverent, almost mournful. The elders exchanged uneasy glances. They had heard those words before, carved in ancient runes deep in the sealed tombs of the first spirit vessels. A prophecy, buried because it could not be understood. Until now. Some fell to their knees, calling her touched by the void's will. Others turned away in fear. One elder, Marin Hollowreed, stepped forward and laid a hand on her shoulder. "What did you see, Saloon?" he asked softly. She looked past him, past the stone, past the present. Her voice was a whisper of threads unraveling. "I saw a reflection of our world. One without flame, tide, storm, or bloom. Where stone sleeps and shadow breathes. And it remembered me." She turned then, and walked deeper into the hollow deep, toward the wound of silence, a chasm that had not stirred since the age of binding. Behind her, the memory pillar dimmed, its spirits retreating as if afraid. Selûne was not what she once was. She had crossed a threshold few dared even name. And she had brought something back with her, not a weapon, but a truth. One that could unmake the balance of the elemental orders, or save them. Chapter 3: Broken Accord. In the days of the second elemental accord, the pact between the Stonebound and the Spirit Walkers was etched into the bedrock of the Ironroot Barrens, an agreement forged not of ink and words, but of ritual and resonance. It had held for generations. Until now. A fracture had appeared in the rock shelf near the moor of Calgarwan that wasn't there a moon ago. Miners of the Stonebound order uncovered something strange buried beneath layers of uncut granite, a monolith forged not from natural stone, but from a glimmering black material that pulsed faintly with violet light. The golem overseeing the excavation, normally silent and steady, recoiled upon seeing it. Some called it void stone. Others, something worse. Room Earthspeaker stood over the unearthed artifact, his jaw clenched, fists curled into the dust. Beside him, Garrick and two other stonebound warriors murmured in awe. The artifact was covered in glyphs, some of which moved when you weren't looking directly at them. "This should be sealed," Room said. "Now." Garrick shook his head. "It should be studied. We were meant to find this." "I didn't ask the stone to open," Room growled. "And neither did you. This thing is awake. It's watching us." Far to the east, in the upper reaches of Hollow Deep, Selûne received word. Her violet gaze deepened with memory. She came without a retinue. No ceremony. No fanfare. Just a dark hood, trailing silence behind her. When she arrived at the excavation site, time seemed to hold its breath. Room met her at the boundary stone. The last time they had stood face to face, it had been as tentative allies during the convergence at the Temple of Equinox. Now the tension between them was granite heavy. "You've come for it," Room said. It wasn't a question. Selûne nodded. "It was not lost. It was buried. There's a difference. The Accord says we share what lies beneath these lands," he said. "But it was ours before the Accord," she countered. "Before the Stonebound were ever carved from the clay." A crowd was gathering, Stonebound, Spirit Walkers, and even a few curious druids from the wilds. The glyphs on the voidstone monolith began to glow faintly, as if feeding on the tension in the air. "I won't let you unseal it," Room said. "Not while I stand." "Then you'll fall," Selûne whispered, not with threat but with inevitability. That night, emissaries from Hollow Deep set camp near the excavation. Stonebound guards patrolled their side. No battle broke, but the line had been drawn. The Accord, once a quiet pact of mutual trust, was now a brittle word few dared say aloud. And as both sides returned to their councils, the voidstone monolith pulsed once. As if amused. Chapter 4: The Deepstone Archive. To the Stonebound, knowledge was not scribed, it was engraved. And nowhere was that more sacred than the Deepstone Archive. Carved into the sheer cliffs of the Ironroot Barrens, the archive was a fortress of memory. Its walls bore etchings that predated the First Accord, some older than the Orchid Flame itself. Towering halls of stratified basalt and granite spiral downward into the earth, layer by layer, like a spiral echo of time. Each stratum held the truths of an age, the history of the Stonebound, the secrets of the core, and prophesies too dangerous to utter aloud. Room Earthspeaker descended those winding stairs with leaden steps, his thoughts storm-tossed. The broken accord, the glyph-covered monolith, and Saloon's cryptic words haunted him. He needed answers. And the archive was the only place ancient enough to provide them. At the threshold of the central chamber stood archivist Corin, cloaked in robes the color of dried clay, his face like weathered stone. He bowed deeply to Room not out of formality, but reverence. Few Earthspeakers descended alone. The archive opens to you, Room, Corin intoned. The strata await your voice. The hall fell silent as Room stepped inside. Unlike other libraries, the Deepstone Archive did not use scrolls or tomes. Instead, its walls were covered in living veins of memory stonerock that responded to voice. When Room whispered the Earth Code, the veins began to glow softly, and the wall in front of him shimmered with imagery. Towering orcs shaping the land with their fists, battles with the tide, the rise of the stone-bound Concord. But deeper still past the history of conquest, past even the pact with the Spirit Walkers lay a sealed engraving. A circular pattern of obsidian and silver, ringed by a phrase etched in a language older than elemental speech. That which is buried remembers. He placed his palm against the seal. A rumble answered, the engraving rotated. Dust fell from the ceiling. A hidden panel cracked open, revealing a buried segment of the archive no one had touched in centuries. Inside, Room found something staggering, a record of a forgotten war. It spoke of an age before the elements had divided. When the world was raw, and stone and shadow were one. Together, they created the world's foundation. But as order took shape, the shadow recoiled seeking silence, stillness, and solitude. Stone, unwilling to break, sealed it away beneath the earth. The sealing had not been righteous. It had been desperate. Worse yet, there had been a warning left behind. A prophecy carved by a dying earthshaper. If the seal falters, the core will call. And shadow will answer. Room staggered back. This was not just history. This was now. He turned to Corin, who had remained outside the room. We buried a wound, Room said, voice hoarse. And it's bleeding again. Corin's eyes widened. What will you do? Room looked down at his hand, still glowing faintly from the contact. I need to descend deeper. To where even stone fears to speak. And with that, he passed beneath the archive's lowest threshold into the vaults where prophecy, betrayal, and origin slept beneath layers of silence. Chapter 5: The Council Divides. Within the obsidian halls of the Deepstone Archive, echoes of ancient decisions hung in the air like dust. The council chamber was circular, hewn from a single seamless block of granite, its domed ceiling etched with the runes of every stone-bound chieftain since the Dawn Accord. Torches of molten amber lined the perimeter, casting flickering shadows across the weathered faces of those gathered. For the first time in centuries, the full Stone Council had convened. At the center stood Room Earthspeaker, flanked by Runak and the seers who had interpreted the core's fracturing pulse. His presence alone was enough to draw silence, but the weight of his words had already stirred unease. The core is unstable, Room declared, voice rough as gravel. It speaks of something buried, something waking. Grumbles spread like cracks across the chamber. Councillor Dravik, eldest among them and carved seemingly from stone himself, scoffed. The earth always shifts. You mistake tremors for prophecy. No, countered Runak, stepping forward. We've all felt the change beneath us. Golems are hesitating. The ley stones hum with foreign resonance. Even the youngest geomancers say the stones no longer respond as before. Another counselor, Tharn of the Western Reach, narrowed his eyes. Then we reinforce the foundation. If the core is compromised, we strengthen the vault. And if it isn't just stone we're dealing with? Room asked, gaze sweeping the circle. What if it's void? A hush followed. The word carried a forbidden weight. Many here had ancestors who once fought in the Hollow Wars, the time when spirit walkers and shadowborn cults tore caverns into unmade spirals. No one dared speak of it openly. Until now. The Hollow Deep is sealed, Dravik said flatly. Let it remain legend. But legend is stirring, said Room, voice deepening. If we wait, we may only see rubble. The council erupted. Some bellowed for containment. Others demanded war preparations. One faction, led by the younger Earthshapers, urged diplomacy with the Spirit Walkers, a move met with derision. They walk between death and dreams, spat Tharn. You'd invite ghosts to our gates. Amid the rising tension, a new voice entered the chamber. Lyrian, Warden of Flame, cloaked in ember-forged armor. With her were Kael'tor of the Tidelands and Thalen of the Skyrend Peaks. Their arrival had not been announced, but none dared eject them. You argue as stone crumbles beneath you, Kael'tor said calmly. This is not just your crisis. It threatens all of Hidden Earth. Kael'tor stepped beside her, his staff trailing salt and light. We come not to interfere, but to unify. If the Hollow rises again, no element will stand alone. A long silence followed. Then, with finality, Councillor Dravik stood. Then you may join the circle, but understand this. We are stonebound. We do not yield to shadow, nor to fear. Room met his gaze. Then you must choose to stand with truth, or be buried beneath it. The council adjourned in discord. No resolution reached. No unity found. Outside, the mountain trembled once more. Chapter 6, Kael'tor's Council. The Cradle of Balance was a place where no single element ruled. A ring-shaped mesa suspended above the convergence of four ley lines, it was chosen long ago as neutral ground for moments of great reckoning. Here, no tide surged, no flame burned, no wind howled, and no root crept, only stillness and echo, framed by monolithic stones from each elemental realm. Now, it awaited its most precarious assembly since the Age of Fracture. Kael'tor of the Tidelands stood at the mesa's center, robed in water-woven blue and silver, his trident planted firmly in the earth beside him. His once warrior frame had grown leaner since the Tidecaller's last campaign, but his presence carried the calm gravity of the ocean before a storm. This summit was his idea, a last effort to hold the elements together before shadow pulled them apart. By his side stood Lyrian, Warden of Flame. Clad in Ember's teal and trailing firelace veils, her stance was quiet but commanding. Her eyes, once wild with the flames of battle, now burned with tempered resolve. She had seen war once already and had no desire to see it again. Guests from across Hidden Earth gathered, druids from the Eleran wilds, storm priests from the Skyrend Peaks, and scouts from Stonehold. They circled the platform, watching, waiting. But all turned as two figures approached from opposite ends of the mesa. On one side Room Earthspeaker, his crimson skin layered with dust, his voice heavy as mountain rain. On the other Saloon of the Hollow Gaze, barefoot, her void-kissed form half-shadowed, half-lit by the pale sun above. This was the first time they had stood face to face since the standoff at the excavation site. No greetings. No pleasantries. Just silence thick as pressure before an earthquake. Kael'tor began. Hidden earth stands on the brink. The core stirs, hollow deep breathes, and elemental pacts falter. We must decide now if we will face this together, or fall apart before it begins. Selûne's voice came first soft, yet resonant. The void has never been your enemy. Only your shadow. You fear what you buried, because you do not understand it. Room crossed his arms. What I understand is what the stone tells me. The seal kept the hollow contained. If it weakens, the world will fracture. Lyrian stepped between them, holding a glowing emberstone in her hand. Both of you speak truth supposing, but incomplete. Void is not absence. It is memory. And stone is not strength. It is burden. You are two sides of the same wound. Thalen's skydrift descended from above in a gust of wind, his presence like the breath of a coming storm. Then bind the wound. Don't tear it open further. Sylve Lightvale arrived last, vines curling at her heels, her expression serene but watchful. Balance cannot be enforced. It must be nurtured. The moment teetered. Selûne's gaze drifted skyward, as though listening to something no one else could hear. Room's fists tightened, but he did not interrupt. Kael'tor stepped forward. If we don't act together, the hollow will choose for us. And it does not negotiate. A long pause. Selûne finally nodded. Then let the cradle witness a pact. Not of peace. Not yet. But of preparation. Room spoke only once more before turning away. If we're to face what comes, we do it in the deep. Where stone remembers. Come find me beneath the archive when you're ready. The gathering ended not with unity but with possibility. Above them, the sky darkened not from clouds, but from silence rising on the wind. Chapter 7: Rise of the Hollow Host. The first to rise had no name. Its form was fractured, a jagged silhouette stitched together from memories and regret. Where its face once was, now only a shimmer remained, like the reflection of a forgotten face on still water. It drifted upward from the wound of silence, arms trailing wisps of echolight, head bowed as if listening to a song the world had chosen to forget. Then came another. And another until the cavern beneath Hollow Deep was filled with them, dozens, then hundreds, rising from crevices in the stone and pools of void light. The hollow host, long dormant fragments of soul and silence, called by the waking of the voidstone seal. Selûne of the hollow gaze stood among them. Her cloak billowed not from wind, but from the breath of the spirits themselves. She had seen them before once, during her initiation, when she walked the veil path and became hollowbound. Back then, they had been silent watchers. Now they whispered. Some begged. Some wept. A few still remembered names, fragments of lives before the first sealing. Warriors. Oracles. Walkers between worlds. All of them had once sacrificed themselves to hold back the shadow beneath the world. And now, they were returning. Why? Selûne asked, her voice hushed. Because the seal weakens, came the answer not from a single mouth, but from many, speaking in the same cadence. And because you returned. She stepped forward, reaching for one of them, a spirit cloaked in fading armor, its chest marked with the same void sigil she bore on her brow. As her fingers brushed its essence, memory flooded through her, a cavern of obsidian teeth. A scream of something that had no throat. A binding circle drawn in blood and silence. Her own hand, or was it another's? Placing a shard of shadow into the earth. And the final whisper, "We must forget." Selûne staggered back, her breath cold. The spirit bowed its head. "You are the unbinder. You carry the echo. You must decide, do we return, or do we rest?" Above them, cracks spread through the stone like lightning frozen in slow motion. Selûne looked up. The void stone pulsed again, louder, stronger. Its resonance had shifted, no longer just remembering, now summoning. She turned to the hollow host. "No," she said. "You do not return. Not yet. You guide me. One last time." At her words, the host formed a spiral around her, coalescing into patterns once used by the first spirit weavers. The glyphs ignited with soul light, not fire, not magic, something older. Something pure. Far above, in ironroot barrens, the same glyphs carved into the canyon walls began to glow to the shock of the stone-bound sentries. Room Earthspeaker felt the pull in his chest. The void had risen, and so had its guardians. The hollow host did not rise in anger. They rose to remind the world of what it had once dared to forget. Chapter 8: Stonebound Rebellion. The forges of Stonehold had grown too quiet. Where once hammer rang against anvil in rhythm with the heartbeat of the barons, now tension coiled in silence, a silence not of peace, but of doubt. The stonebound stood uneasy in their strongholds. Cracks had formed not just in the earth beneath them, but in their ranks. Room Earthspeaker had seen it coming. The deeper he went into the truths unearthed in the Deepstone archive, the more he sensed resistance among his own. Not from outsiders or rivals, but from within, from those who called him kin. They were led by Warchanta Braca, a fire-eyed orc with arms as thick as masonry and a voice that could split granite. Braca bore the mark of the earth-blooded, those stonebound who believed in power above prophecy, who saw the Voidstones awakening not as a threat, but as an opportunity. "It sings to us, Room," Braca bellowed before the gathered war clans. "Not to destroy us, but to make us whole. We've been scraping the surface for too long. The power buried below is ours by right." Room stood firm before the great standing circle in the Arena of Echoes, a place where all Earthspeakers were once tested and sometimes broken. "That stone was sealed for a reason," he said. "It is not a gift. It is a grave." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Some nodded toward Room elders, stone priests, old war veterans. But others shifted uneasily. Too many younger voices filled with ambition rather than memory. "The world is changing," Braca snarled. "Tide callers command the oceans. Bloom wardens regrow entire forests in days. Even the skies themselves bend to storm shamans now. What do we have? Dust and honor?" Room raised a hand, not in threat, but in invocation. "We have foundation. We are what everything else stands on. You want to chase power from shadow, Braca? You will bring the ceiling down on us all." Braca slammed a fist into the stone floor. "Then let the ceiling fall. Better broken by strength than buried by fear." The chamber shook as more of Braca's followers stepped forward, not with weapons, but with purpose. Dozens. Perhaps hundreds. And deep in the tunnels, the Voidstone's song grew louder, like a low hum resonating through the bones of the mountain. Later that night, Room returned to the archive. The glyphs had shifted again. Where once the script read sealed by a cord, now it burned with a new warning. When the stone forgets, the shadow remembers. He clenched his jaw. The rebellion had begun not with swords, but with belief. And if he couldn't stop it, the stone-bound might not just fracture. They might fall. Chapter 9: Cracks in the Archive. The deep stone archive had never changed. That was its purpose. It was sacred, carved into the mantle beneath Stonehold, not simply to preserve memory, but to resist it. Here, history was fixed. Immutable. Untouched by the will of mortals or the passage of time. Until now. Room Earthspeaker stood in the center of the Hall of Foundations, surrounded by towering slabs of stratified lore. The glyphstones around him flickered, faint veins of reddish void light threading through the once steady runes like corruption seeping into crystal. He turned toward the prime archivist. Gorun, ancient, motionless, and partially embedded in the floor itself, stirred with grinding reluctance. The golem's voice was slower than usual, as if the very syntax of his memory was eroding. "It is not just the past," Gorun rumbled. "It is the order of memory that fractures." Room stepped closer, brushing dust from one of the glyph slabs. The inscription beneath his hand had shifted since he last saw it only days before. Where once it told the tale of the first accord, the sacred pact between the stonebound and spirit walkers to bind the Voidstone, now it spoke of betrayal. The words changed as he watched. Stone reshaping itself. History rewriting in real time. "This is not possible," Room muttered. "It is not rewriting," Gorun corrected. "It is remembering." Room looked at him. "You're saying the archive forgot? That it was made to forget?" The golem's glowing eyes dimmed. "No archive is perfect. Ours was built not only to remember, but to obey. The founders edited the truth." Room reeled. He had believed the archive incorruptible, the literal bedrock of their culture. But now, it trembled. Its foundation cracked by forces even deeper than stone. The chamber trembled again, subtly, but continuously now, like a heartbeat through the earth. Books of fossilized bark split down the spine. Obsidian plates shattered without touch. And from the deepest corridor, a low, unrelenting hum resonated. Room followed the sound. At the end of the passage, a new door had formed, not built, but grown. A wall of stone once flat and unremarkable now bore a spiral seal of void light, pulsing gently like a watchful eye. He placed his hand on it. Memories surged into his mind. Visions of the core, of stone and shadow merging into one entity, of golems breaking free of their circuits, of Bracca's voice calling from a blood-soaked canyon, of saloons standing in hollow deep, surrounded by the hollow host. He tore his hand back with a gasp. Behind him, Gorun groaned again. "The archive is breaking. Not because it is failing, but because it is no longer enough." Room turned, his voice low. "Then we must find the truth they sealed, and face whatever they feared." From the new passage, a whisper coiled like smoke through the air. Foundations crack, when what was buried wants to rise. Chapter 10: Shadows and Embers. The flames of the Emberlands rarely dimmed. They rose in endless plumes from volcanic calderas, danced in spirals above obsidian towers, and rippled across the robes of the orchid sorceresses like living lace. The flame was eternal, steady, proud. So when the fire shuddered, the flame warden took notice. Lyrian, warden of Ember and memory keeper of the oldest flame scripts, stood upon the crimson perch, a balcony carved into the throat of Mount Ziereth, where fire met sky. Behind her, The Ember Priory buzzed with unrest, apprentices reporting visions in the smoke, fissures forming along the flame altars, and a strange darkness creeping into their scrying bowls. But Lyrian already knew what it meant. She had seen it before, once, long ago, in her fire dreams. A vision she had locked away, buried beneath centuries of discipline. A vision of flame dimming to shadow. She extended her palm, summoning a sphere of sacred fire. Its surface danced with moving flame script, usually unreadable unless coaxed. Now, it burned with clarity. The characters pulsed in tandem with the same phrase, repeating in an old tongue no student had spoken in generations. The flame remembers the stone it once warmed. Lyrian closed her fist, extinguishing the flame. She turned as Kael'thor approached from the spiral stairs, his sea robe heavy with salt, his usually calm expression carved with worry. "It's spreading," he said. "Even the tide pools are dimming at their edges. Light is being pulled inward, like breath before a drowning." Lyrian nodded. "The balance is failing. It began with the storm and bloom. Now stone and shadow unravel it entirely." Kael'thor stepped forward, lowering his voice. "We've received word from the wilds. Sylve has vanished into the deep groves, she's looking for something ancient. And Saloon, she's leading the hollow host," Lyrian finished. "Then the war has already begun." Kael'thor frowned. "It's not a war yet. It will be," she said, "if we do not act." He studied her, then gestured toward the ember-choked horizon. "The last time we interfered in another accord, we nearly lost half the realm. We interfered with storm and bloom because the world demanded it," Lyrian said, her voice gaining heat. "This time, we must go deeper." She turned to the great brazier, where the flames of ancestral orchid sorceresses flickered in eternal vigil. With a motion of her hand, she drew fire into a sharp spiral, casting a map of hollow deep into the smoke. "What burns now," she whispered, "burns beneath the world." Kael'thor's hand hovered over the smoky image. "Then we descend. Into fire, shadow, and silence. And hope," she added, her eyes glowing brighter. "That the oldest embers are still hot enough to hold the darkness back." Chapter 11 Into Hollow Deep. The descent into Hollow Deep was not a journey. It was a surrender. At the edge of the Ironroot Barrens, beneath a jagged ridge cloaked in storm-born mist, a spiraling crevice opened, its mouth wide and dark, swallowing all sound. Once sealed by ancient rites, the passage had been reopened not by will, but by memory. And now, a small gathering stood at its threshold, the weight of destiny pressing on their shoulders like the ceiling of a collapsing world. Room Earth Speaker stood at the front, gauntleted hands clasped around a staff of root-bound obsidian, carved with deep glyphs that pulsed in rhythm with the stone beneath. His eyes, hardened by rebellion and betrayal, burned with a quiet fury. Beside him, Saloon of the Hollow Gaze emerged from shadow like mist through a veil. The hollow host swirled faintly behind her, echoes held back by her will, but not her command. She had led them here not as a general, but as a guide, one who understood that the path forward required walking the blade between void and self. Behind them came Kael'thor, robes dripping salt even far from sea, and Lyrian, whose crimson glow cast long shadows against the stone. Thalen Skydrift and Sylve Lightveil followed silently, their presence not loud, but anchored the storm and bloom of the world bearing witness to its most ancient truths. Before them yawned the staircase, the spiral of ashen bone, a staircase not built, but revealed, formed of hollowed ribs of an ancient being the spirit walkers had never named. Each step echoed not only through the caverns, but through time. "No torches," Saloon said, her voice hushed but firm. "Fire disturbs the spirits here." "Stone remembers without flame," Room replied, stepping forward. Downward they moved, one after another, their breath growing shallow as the air thickened. Runes along the wall flickered not in light, but in unlight, the negative of fire, the inverse of presence. The spiral narrowed, tightened, until the silence itself pressed against their ears. Finally, they reached it. The vault of morning, a vast chamber hollowed out eons ago by spirit and stone, lit only by void crystals dangling from the ceiling like black chandeliers. The floor bore the ancient seal, now half broken, its pattern fracturing like frost on glass. Saloon stepped forward, her cloak blooming into tendrils of shadow. Her voice echoed strangely in the space, doubling back on itself. "This is where they bound it. The first seal. Not by force, by memory." Kael'tor knelt beside the cracked sigil. "It's still bleeding." A low hum began to rise, not from the stone, but from the air itself. The hollow host stirred, drifting into the chamber's corners, whispering warnings no one could fully grasp. Lyrian summoned a single ember to her palm. "If it awakens here, we will not survive." Room turned toward Saloon. "Then we must finish what our ancestors began." Saloon's gaze met his shadow and stone, no longer divided, but no closer to unity. "It was never finished," she whispered. "It was only delayed." And far beneath their feet, the ground shifted, not from instability, but from something beneath, rising to meet them. Chapter 12: The Core Awakens. The tremor did not shake the walls. It breathed through them. Within the vault of morning, where silence held dominion for millennia, the hum deepened into a subterranean groan, low, resonant, and alive. The ancient seal beneath the council's feet began to glow, its cracks forming a spiral of pulsating void light, each ring opening like a pupil dilating to light. But it wasn't light it was seeking. It was release. Room Earthspeaker stepped forward, fists clenched at his sides. The symbols engraved across his arms, sigils of the Earthspeaker's line, flared in muted ochre, reacting to something not born of Earth, but older than its shaping. "The core is not below us," he said slowly. "We are in it." A pulse shot through the chamber, not an explosion, not a quake, but a heartbeat. The broken seal burst outward into floating fragments, and beneath it, a vast chasm opened, an abyssal wound lined with obsidian roots and veins of shimmering void. From its depths rose a form. Not fully stone, nor fully spirit. It was a being of fusion, towering and half-formed, its body composed of tectonic plates floating around a hollow center. The empty cavity in its chest glowed with swirling shadow, a storm of unspoken memory and unbound potential. Its face was featureless but familiar, resembling the reliefs carved into the lost walls of the Deepstone Archive, the nameless guardian. The creature spoke no words, but a voice rang through every corner of the vault, a thought carved directly into the minds of those present. "I was sealed, by fear. Forgotten, by choice. I awaken, by necessity." Saloon fell to one knee, overwhelmed by the resonance. The hollow host quivered around her, flickering like torn fabric in a rising wind. She reached out, not in command, but in recognition. "It's not just an entity," she whispered. "It's a consequence." Lyrian stepped forward, flame dancing across her skin. What is its intent? The voice replied. To restore what was before the split. Before the flame. Before the wave. Before the wind. Before the bloom. Before division. Kael'tor's eyes widened. You want to undo the elements? No, came the answer. I want to merge them. One form. One world. One will. Thalen instinctively summoned wind around the group, shielding them from the deepening pressure. And what happens to choice? Choice is what fractured the core. The being, now fully risen, hovered above the chasm, gravitational force bending the void around it. Stones lifted from the floor. Cracks spidered through the air itself. The laws of reality began to blur. Room stepped to the edge, staring upward. You are not a god. No, the voice rumbled. I am the memory of unity. Saloon stood beside him, her voice trembling. Then what you seek would end us. The entity did not respond, only turned, slowly, as if watching time itself spin. And then it began to rise. Out of the core. Toward the surface. Toward a world built on the very fractures it intended to erase. Behind the council, the hollow host began to chant in unison, their voices hollow and rising. The core is awake. The accord is broken. The choice must be made. Chapter 13, The Hollow Mirror. Saloon ran not through tunnels, but through memory. The core's awakening had sent more than tremors through the world. It had pierced her, threading through the void bond etched in her spirit. As the entity rose from the chasm, Saloon's consciousness fractured, pulled backward, inward, downward into a realm beyond stone, shadow, or time. She fell into the hollow mirror. Her ethereal form was gone, and she stood as a human. This place did not exist in the waking world. It floated beneath it, a reflection not of what was, but what could have been. The mirror was a realm woven from unrealized paths, distorted futures, and forsaken truths, all born from the same decision to seal the core long ago. Saloon stood at the center of it. Or floated. Or drifted. In her human form. There was no floor, no ceiling, no horizon, only layers of silvered shadow rippling outward like the surface of a moonlit lake, reflecting scenes she could not remember living, and yet knew as if they were her own. The first vision, a world where the accord was never forged. In it, the elemental realms war endlessly, fire burns the forest to cinders, the ocean rises to swallow the sky, and the ironroot barrens crack open like skulls beneath siege. The core is never sealed. The hollow host never forms. Chaos reigns. Another vision, a world where the core was never discovered, the elements remain at peace, stagnant, untested. Civilization forgets its depth. The spirit walkers fade into myth, their knowledge reduced to ghost stories. Magic weakens. Silence grows. Then, a world where the core was embraced. All elements are fused, not balanced, but consumed. One people. One magic. One ruler, a being made of stone and shadow, directing the world with perfect symmetry. A utopia without freedom. A paradise without choice. Saloon turned, gasping. The mirror shimmered again, showing her room not as she knew him, but as a warlord, consumed by the core's power, leading armies of fused stone-void hybrids. His eyes were not his own. His voice echoed with the core's will. No, she whispered. That is not him. Another ripple, a reflection of herself, seated on a throne of bone and obsidian, surrounded by the hollow host. her voice chanting the undoing of the accord, her crown a fragment of the broken seal. I would never dash but you could, a voice said. It came not from the mirror, but within it. Selûne turned and saw her reflection step forward, same face, same eyes, but colder. More still. More hollow. You were chosen not for what you are, the mirror Selûne said, but for what you might become. Why show me this? Because the core awakens to reshape the world. And you are still fractured. You must choose what world you walk into. The mirror around her rippled violently. Behind the reflection, she saw a final vision. Her and Room, together, standing not as enemies, not even as opposites, but as anchors. One of stone. One of shadow. Holding the rift closed, at great cost. Not sealing. Not fusing. Balancing. The mirror shuddered and cracked. Selûne screamed as it splintered around her, shards of futures colliding, collapsing, fading, and then she woke. Gasping. Room stood above her, eyes wide. You vanished. I was shown what could be, she whispered. And what must not be. Her hands trembled. But her voice was steady. We still have a choice. Far above, the core entity rose into the world. And far below, in the now shattered hollow mirror, only one shard remained. It reflected not possibility, but conviction. Chapter 14: Room's Trial. The call of the stone was no longer a whisper. It was a roar, vibrating through the marrow of the world, a voice that did not speak in words but in weight, pressure, memory. Room Earth Speaker felt it drag him inward, not with force, but with inevitability. He had fought the stone-bound rebellion. He had stood before the awakened core. But now, the greatest challenge lay not in battle, but in remembrance. At the heart of Stonehold, beneath even the deep stone archive, there was a place no map dared mark. The cradle of bedrock. Carved from the first mountain ever named, the cradle was not built by hand but shaped by vow. Here, the Earth Speakers of old came to prove themselves, not to others, but to the stone itself. And the stone did not lie. Room stepped across the threshold alone. The chamber was silent, circular, endless in its stillness. The walls rippled with ancient glyphs, not etched but grown, like veins of memory winding through granite. In the center rose a pillar of translucent rock, within which flickered echoes of every Earth Speaker who came before. As Room approached, the pillar pulsed and cracked open, revealing a throne of petrified roots and obsidian. He knelt, pressing both hands to the stone. The world disappeared. He did not fall asleep. He fell inward. Suddenly, he stood on a plain of dust and shattered pillars, a place that looked like iron root, yet older, more primal. Skies of red ash churned overhead, and distant mountains wept lava. He was not alone. Before him stood Varrock, the first speaker, founder of the Stonebound Order, his body carved from volcanic basalt, his voice deep as collapsed canyons. You seek to bear what we buried. I seek to understand what we feared, Room replied. Another figure appeared, a woman, obsidian-skinned and draped in golden chains. Areli Flint Mother, who led the second accord. We chose to seal the core, not out of cowardice, but because unity without difference is not peace. It is extinction. One by one, the echoes of the Earth Speakers appeared, warriors, shamans, philosophers, architects, each offering a fragment of the past. Each reminding Room that their choice had not been weakness, but sacrifice. But then came another. A shape made of fault lines and fire. Braca. Or rather, a vision of what Braca could become, twisted by the core, armored in fused voidstone, eyes glowing with unnatural purpose. You could end all war, it said. You could make them kneel. The core would obey you. You have the strength. Room stepped forward, voice calm. Strength without choice is stone without shape. He clenched his fists. And stone must be shaped, not ruled. The vision shattered. The plane cracked. The echoes dissolved. And Room stood once more in the cradle of bedrock, breathless, shaking but whole. The pillar glowed now with a single rune, one only he could read. Foundation. He stood and turned toward the tunnel above. Saloon would be waiting. The core was no longer a mystery. But stopping it would require both of them. Together. Chapter 15, The Rift Below. The world did not break with a scream. It exhaled a long, low breath of strain and surrender, as if the earth itself had accepted that it could no longer hold what stirred beneath. Across the iron-root barrens, the ground began to ripple. Not crack. Not quake. But heave like something beneath the crust was waking from a long, furious dream. Stone spires toppled in slow motion. Ravines opened along dormant fault lines. Deep under Stonehold, the rift below was forming. And it was not alone. From the southern cliffs, Kael'tor stood on a high ridge, sea winds biting at his tide-etched skin. Below him, the barrens were bleeding smoke. Elemental sigils, once carved into the walls of canyon passes, were now crumbling not from erosion, but from rejection. The land was rewriting itself. He turned around and spoke to the rest of the tide-callers. The rift is expanding. Stonehold may not hold another night. Evacuate all non-combatants. Prepare containment. Farther east, Sylve Lightvale knelt in the ash-covered grass at the edge of the Eleran wilds. Even here, root paths were splitting. Trees bent away from the barrens. Nature itself recoiled. Her vines, usually obedient and responsive, quivered and withered when extended toward the rift. The land is sick, she whispered. Not dying, but shedding. From the north, Thaylen Skydrift soared over the fractured plain, riding the last steady updrafts above the Skyrend range. His storm sight saw far beyond mortal vision, and what he saw now horrified him. The core entity, still rising, now loomed like a living monument, a fusion of stone and void, casting no shadow, because it was the shadow. And from its ascent, the rift below widened, an open wound in the world that radiated pulses of anti-elemental force, nullifying magic, memory, meaning. Thaylen's voice crackled over the air channel. The core isn't just climbing. It's dragging the world with it. The rift isn't a crack, it's a pull. And if it keeps widening, Sylve finished the thought silently, the accord will fall. Back in Hollow Deep, Room and Saloon stood together at the rim of the rupture. The hollow host formed a ring around them, their faint figures flickering in unison, whispering chants meant to hold the seams of the realm together, but they were fading. Bound to memory, they could only delay the inevitable. Not prevent it. Saloon knelt and touched the ground, her fingers trailing along the rift's jagged edge. The hollow mirror showed me this. Not exactly, but close. Room nodded, gaze fixed on the distant glow of the rising core entity. We can't stop the rise. No, she agreed. But we can meet it. Room pressed his palm into the cracked stone beneath him. He closed his eyes. Earth remembers. Saloon opened her hands, summoning the last strength of her spirit form. Shadow sees. Together, their presence forged a temporary anchor, not a seal, not a prison, but a channel. A path to confront the core not as two fractured forces, but as a united will of choice and resistance. From above, Kael'tor, Lyrian, Thalen, and Sylve gathered at the edges of the expanding rift. They would hold the perimeter, delay collapse, keep the world from tipping, while Room and Saloon descended into the heart of the rift. Toward the source. Toward the memory of a world that once chose division and might now be asked to choose unity, or oblivion. Chapter 16, Saloon's Pact. The descent into the rift was beyond silence. Here, at the edge of the known world, the rules no longer held. Shadow had weight. Stone bled memory. Even time faltered, stretching and contracting like breath held too long. The deeper Saloon moved into the wound carved beneath hidden earth, the more she felt the boundaries of her soul fray. And at the heart of it all was the core entity rising, vast and terrible. It hovered above the center of the abyss like a god not born, but remembered. Its chest was a hollow spiral, swirling with every forgotten truth, every sealed secret, every silence never spoken. Pieces of earth orbited it like thoughts too dense to contain. Its presence unmade certainty. Its gravity pulled not just at stone, but at will. Behind Saloon, Room followed, his stone glow dim but steady. His presence was an anchor, the only thing holding her together as the hollow host began to dissolve, one by one, their forms fading into the void they once helped seal. She knew the truth now. The hollow host had never been meant to last. They were a tether, a bridge, a means to carry Saloon, the unbinder, to this moment. They had given her their memory. Now, she had to choose what to do with it. She stepped forward alone. The core entity turned. Not physically, it had no true head, but its awareness bent toward her like a tidal force. You return to shadow, to halt what should be made whole? Saloon stood tall, though her spirit form flickered like wind-scattered flame. I return to remind you that the world does not belong to one will. Not even a will born from all. I was sealed, the entity echoed. Because unity frightened them. They chose division. Chaos. War. Choice. They chose difference, she said, voice rising. And from it, beauty emerged. The core pulsed, its swirling heart expanding. Shards of fused elemental memory spun around her, flames that turned to rain, mountains sinking into oceans, vines reaching skyward only to be consumed by ash. You are fractured. You suffer. You fear silence. I offer purpose. I offer peace. Saloon stepped forward. Her cloak flared behind her, not with void, but with all that she had carried through the hollow. No. You offer erasure. You want to flatten the world into a single voice. I will not allow it. She drew the final essence of the hollow host into her spirit, their voices layering with hers, until she no longer spoke alone. We are the unbound. We are the remembrance. We choose to remember pain because from it comes truth. The entity surged. Room stepped beside her now, pressing his hand to hers. If we bind this thing again, it will return. The seal will break, like it did before. Saloon nodded. Then we do not bind it. She turned her eyes to the core. I offer myself. Room froze. Saloon. She raised a hand, gently silencing him. not as a prison. As a mirror. Let it see itself not as what should be, but what is. A memory. Not a master. The core entity hesitated. And then, for the first time, dimmed. The spiral at its heart faltered, slowed, reacting not to violence, but to reflection. Selûne stepped into its light. She closed her eyes. She did not fight it. She received it. And in that moment, the spiral wrapped around her, and folded inward. A cry echoed across the rift, not of agony, but of release. The core stopped rising. The world held its breath. And Selûne was gone. But not erased. Transformed. In the deepest part of the rift, a new light pulsed where shadow once ruled, a single glowing thread of silver and black, twisting like a vine through obsidian. It whispered not in command, but in harmony. Selûne had become the memory of resistance. The mirror. The choice. And far above, the hollow host was no more. But the world remembered. Chapter 17, Twin Pillars. The rift had stopped expanding. But it had not closed. The core no longer rose, its spiral heart dimmed, its gravitational pull quieted, yet the scar remained, stretching across the ironroot barrens like a wound too deep to heal clean. From its edge, stone groaned in stillness, unsure whether to collapse or to rebuild. The world waited. And from that silence emerged two figures. Room Earthspeaker, bruised, burned, yet unbroken, climbed to the summit of the shattered ridge. In his right hand, he held Selûne's staff, now wrapped in silver-black thread, its crystal tip pulsing with gentle void light. He looked not down into the rift, but up toward the sky. Toward balance. Beside him, the last of the stone-bound elders and surviving spirit weavers had begun work on the twin pillars, twin monoliths carved from the fallen shards of the deep stone archive and woven with fragments of void crystal recovered from the core's heart. These would not be monuments of conquest. They would be anchors. At the base of the rising pillars, Kael'tor, Lyrian, Thalen, and Sylve gathered, each offering a piece of their element to the foundation. Water shaped the basin. Flame tempered the stone. Air carved its curves. Bloom rooted it to the land. But it was earth and shadow that crowned the monument. "This isn't a seal," Room said, as the final piece was set. "It's a truth." Lyrian's voice was quiet. She gave herself to memory. "She is memory now," he replied. "Not to control the world. To remind it." One pillar bore the crest of the stone-bound, solid, proud, enduring. The other bore the spiral of the spirit walkers, ever shifting, ever seeking. Between them, etched in both elemental glyph and void script, were Selûne's final words. "We are not meant to be one. We are meant to be together." A slow wind passed through the barrens, not hot, not cold, but clean. It stirred the ashes, kissed the stone, and carried the first green sprout from Sylve's staff up along the pillar's face, where it wrapped gently around both sides. Bloom embracing contrast. As the sun set, the two pillars glowed. Not with magic, but with memory. And as Room placed Selûne's staff at the base of the monument, he whispered, "She chose to become the mirror. Now we must choose what we reflect." Above them, for the first time in days, the stars returned visible through the ash, dancing in the night sky above hidden earth. And between the twin pillars, the world found stillness again. Not peace, not yet. But balance. Chapter 18, The Collapse. The silence did not last. Though the core entity had been stilled and Saloon's sacrifice had held the world in balance, Hidden Earth had not emerged unscathed. The cost of memory is never light. And the rift, though dormant, remained open, a deep scar beneath the ironroot barrens, filled not with void, but with weight, the unbearable pressure of truths unsealed. The earth remembered. And remembering, it began to break. The first fracture came without warning. Deep beneath Stonehold, one of the original foundational struts, crafted by the first Earth Speakers, encoded with ancient binding chants, snapped like brittle bone. A shockwave rippled upward, displacing the canyon walls around the city. Tunnels folded inward. Obsidian bridges crumbled. Above, the cradle of bedrock split down the center. Room felt it before he heard it. He staggered, instinctively pressing one palm into the dirt, trying to soothe it, to calm the resonance. Shah. Hold, old heart. You've carried enough. But the mountain did not listen. The pressure from the rift had cracked the earth's rhythm like a heart with no beat to follow. He turned to the gathered elemental envoys. Kael'tor had already begun evacuations, guiding groups of stone-bound civilians across a hastily stabilized bridge of water-threaded coral. Sylve stood on the ridge, vines spreading across the chasm to weave temporary footpaths. Lyrian and Thalen flew in tandem, catching falling debris, searing open tunnels, and shielding young orcs from the raining stone. But even their combined efforts could not prevent what came next. The southern face of Stonehold collapsed. Not just a wall. The entire mesa. It fell with the slow inevitability of memory giving way, a landslide of centuries, crumbling into the basin below. The deep stone archive, already damaged, folded inward, devoured by its own knowledge. Columns fell. Vaults imploded. Runes flared one final time and vanished. The mountain wept itself shut. Room stood at the brink of it all, watching the place that had raised him, trained him, shaped him, disappear into dust and silence. His hand tightened around the silver-black staff that had once belonged to Saloon. He whispered not to the mountain, but to her, "You gave us time. You showed us how to carry the weight. Now I will carry what's left." As the dust settled and the night crept in, only the twin pillars remained standing at the edge of the devastation, defiant, untouched, glowing faintly beneath the first stars of a healing sky. The world had not been destroyed, but it had been reshaped. Room stepped down the crumbling path, toward the survivors, toward the future, and far below, in the hollowed stone chambers now sealed in silence, a flicker of silver danced between the cracks. Saloon was still there, not trapped, but watching. Chapter 19, From the Rubble. Morning rose slow and heavy over the ironroot barrens. Where once jagged ridges carved the skyline, now vast scars lay open, great gullies of collapsed stone, ridged with fractured memory. The air still trembled with aftershocks, but the worst had passed. The core was still. The rift no longer pulled. The hollow host was gone. And from the rubble, life began again. At the edge of the ruin, beneath the faint glow of the twin pillars, survivors gathered. Kael'tor stood waist-deep in a tide pool he had summoned from the far coasts, using it as a healing spring for wounded stonebound and broken spirit weavers. He moved methodically, hands swirling in quiet patterns over gashes and bruises, pouring water not just over bodies, but souls. Beside him, Sylve Lightveil walked the perimeter of the collapsed mesa. Her footsteps bloomed with green wherever they fell, and though the vines she summoned were slower now, less eager, More reverent, they pushed through even the deepest cracks. From one of them, a single orchid blossom emerged. She knelt beside it, touching its petals. "Shadow can't strangle roots," she whispered. "Not forever." High above, Thalen's skydrift soared, scouting the lands for survivors still buried beneath the rubble. With windglass lenses over his eyes and gusts woven into his cloak, he called out each time he spotted movement. His voice, once sharp with pride, now sang with tempered clarity. He had seen what ambition nearly cost them. He now chose to serve, not steer. Near the base of the twin pillars, Lyrian Flamewarden stood alone, her palm pressed to the cooled stone. Her fire had grown quiet, not extinguished, but softened, like the embers of an honored pyre. She traced her fingers over Saloon's words etched in the stone. "We are not meant to be one. We are meant to be together." A tear slid down her cheek, and she let it fall. Ash and water. Remembrance. And in the center of it all, standing tall amid broken rock and rising hope, was Room Earthspeaker. His arms were caked in dust. His skin was lined with new cracks of light. He bore not a weapon, but Saloon's staff, no longer dark and swirling, but wrapped in flowering root and stone glow. A symbol not of sealing, but of guidance. He spoke to the gathered people not as a warlord or hero, but as one who had carried the weight and survived. "We will not rebuild what we lost," he said. "We will not restore the archive, or seal the core again, or erase the past to protect the future. We will plant something new." Behind him, the chasm that had once housed the core now shimmered faintly, silver mist rising from its depths, gentle, unthreatening, like breath from a resting giant. A monument was not raised there. Instead, a grove began. With vines from Sylve, with waters from Kael'tor, with a seed of flame from Lyrian, with wind to carry its name from Thalen, and with stone to root it, by Room. They called it the Bloom of Memory, and in its heart, a single rune stone glowed, etched with both Earthspeaker sigils and void-script spirals entwined. It read, "We are the wound. We are the healing." And somewhere, in the unseen corners of Hollow Deep, a spiral of silver turned once more. Not a prison. A promise. Epilogue, Stone and Shadow. They came from every corner of hidden earth. Stone-bound elders from the fractured barrens. Spirit walkers drifting like dusklight from the now quiet hollows of Hollow Deep. Tide callers, bloom wardens, storm callers, even orchid sorceresses all walked the worn paths to the edge of the Bloom of Memory, where the land itself now grew from the wound it once feared. No guards. No weapons. No banners. Only remembrance. At the center of the flowering basin stood the twin pillars, now entwined with living root and slow-moving veinstone. One pulsed with earthy amber light, strong and enduring. The other shimmered in waves of soft silver and midnight, a rhythm that changed with the time of day, or perhaps the thoughts of those nearby. Between them, a space had been cleared not for ceremony, but for silence. Room Earthspeaker approached alone. His cloak was torn and patched. The symbol of his order had been reforged in simpler lines, not the strict angles of old stone, but curves that acknowledged movement. Change. On his back, he bore Saloon's staff, now planted permanently at the grove's center, surrounded by spirals of living moss. He stood before the crowd, not above, not apart, and knelt. "I will not speak long," he said, his voice low and steady. "Too many words have already shaped the world. Today, the stone speaks. He pressed his palm to the earth. The roots beneath the bloom of memory pulsed, and the very ground spoke not in language, but in feeling. In weight. In sorrow. In hope. And in truth. From the other side of the twin pillars, a veil of shadow gathered, soft, respectful, and Selûne appeared. Not in flesh but in presence. Her form shimmered like starlight on still water, shaped from memory and anchored by the will of those who refused to forget. The hollow host did not return with her, only the essence of their choice. The mirror of what had been carried. Room looked up. Their eyes met. And the world held its breath. They stepped forward together, each placing one hand on their respective pillar, shadow and stone, past and present, reflection and foundation. The crowd did not cheer. It did not chant. Instead, all knelt. Not in worship, but in remembrance. Caeltor, Lyrian, Thalen, and Sylve moved to the edges of the circle, forming the same pattern that once anchored the elemental convergence during the battle. This time, there was no storm. No flame. No flood. Only stillness. And in that stillness, the accord was not signed. It was understood. Carved not on paper or stone, but into choice. The choice to remember. The choice to stand apart, and still stand together. As night fell over the barrens, the twin pillars shimmered in soft light. One grounded. One shifting. And where they met, a spiral.at the foot of the pillars, a final stone was laid. On it, written in earth script and void glyph, were the words that would define an age: stone endures. Shadow reflects. Together, we shape the world. Stone and shadow. The third accord of hidden earth was not bound by magic or law, but by those who chose to carry its weight. And remember,